Yeah, I think it's very interesting. In some respects, Putin's actions have been treated as responding to NATO expansion. And ironically, by reacting to that NATO expansion, he's now in a position to see NATO actually get more unified, more strengthened, with more commitments from other countries, including Germany, especially to support the NATO budget, to support further NATO support for Ukrainian army. We are seeing sort of a boomerang effect. We're seeing countries that have previously not talked about NATO now talking about applying for membership. There's even talk about this in Finland. So I think we can have an interesting debate about how NATO's persistence in the 1990s and its further expansion into the Soviet bloc might have been a very important point of trigger for Vladimir Putin. But by escalating so quickly, so hard, to the point of having such a large-scale invasion and not just a peacekeeping operation in the east, I think he has essentially overstepped and is now seeing the pushback, and that pushback is in the form of an even more invigorated NATO by this. But I think Germany has always reacted when there's something specific to react to. I think up until that point, Germany was thinking it could play a mediating role, it could be a negotiating partner, and indeed it's possible that if they had stepped to the front, perhaps a whole different scenario unfolded earlier in history. But right now, in the situation, once you cross that border along so many fronts, once it's clear you're no longer just operating as a peacekeeping force in the Donbass, it changes the situation. So I think Germany is simply reacting to the fact that its patience, its perseverance, its approach was basically rejected or ignored or dismissed by the way Russia behaved. So I think this is simply a reaction to the fact that the invasion has in fact happened. Okay. And now Germany is in the position of either, joining everyone else and pushing back hard, or being left as the odd man out in terms of not joining that strong response. So I'm not surprised at all by this. Okay. I think it depends on how you imagine Putin's head working when he talks about something like historical Russia. And he has talked about this enough, I think, and so have other people in the Kremlin, including some of the ideological advisors that work with Putin. I think their vision of historical Russia involves a very strong role for eastern Ukraine. Certainly, Kiev is part of Russia's origin story in terms of being the birthplace of Kiev and Rus, from which eventually the Russian Empire formed. This is not the case for the Baltics. This is not the case for Central Asia. So I'm not necessarily certain that every single republic of the former Soviet Union should be seen as part of historical Russia. He's not talking about restoring the Soviet Union. He's talking about historical Russia. And that's not even the Russian Empire. Ukraine has a special place in Russia's own storytelling about its past. And whether one buys it or not, that story does resonate. Whether it sets the stage for this type of attack is entirely up for grabs. I think you're seeing that the Russian public would have gone along with Vladimir Putin in terms of grievances, in terms of trying to support Russian speakers and Russian culture and language in Ukraine, because that has been there for centuries, at least in the eastern part. But when you call Ukrainians one people, same as you, same as Russians, and then launch this attack without adequate consideration for civilian safety, even if you're intending to use precision bombs, even if you're intending to spare civilian facilities, it's very, very difficult to do that in the context of urban warfare. So I think Putin has miscalculated, I think, the public support for this type of action, even if that public support was there for the grievances he might point to. And in terms of this notion of a strong, empowered, assertive, historical Russia, I do think Ukraine figures much, much more prominently in that than any of the other former republics. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't react with caution. Obviously, a lot of theories and arguments and interpretations have been thrown by the wayside at this point. Okay. So if you're thinking about this from the point of view of a Latvia or Estonia or Lithuania, of course you do everything possible to strengthen yourself to ensure that this doesn't happen to you. But if you're thinking about this from the point of view of the way Vladimir Putin and his ideologues have been talking about historical Russia, it does seem very specifically focused on Ukraine.
Закинул дальше, пошел. Я понял. Давай.